Zoe Buckingham's flight from Paris touched down at Los Angeles International Airport just past midnight, the city lights below twinkling like so many guilty secrets waiting to be unearthed, and the moment her feet hit American soil, every breath she drew felt sharpened by the knowledge that her mother's freedom and her own future hanged in the balance. She had barely slept these past 24 hours, haunted by visions of Grace in handcuffs, the weight of $1 million fraud scheme crushing the Buckingham name, and the cold certainty that Finn and Bridget, having already uncovered the forgeries that led to Liam's false cancer cure, would now turn their sights on every last shred of evidence that could seal their mother's fate. Zoe's cell phone had buzzed incessantly on the tarmac. First with a terse text from Carter urging caution, then from her sister Julie demanding updates, and finally the press release that changed everything. Dr. Grace Buckingham arraigned on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and endangering patient lives. Arrested at Mercy West Medical Center. License suspended pending trial. No mention of the real scandal hidden beneath the headlines, the phantom operating room in the basement, the off-the-book sedations, the forged histology slides. Zoe pressed her forehead against the airplane window, willing herself to steady the storm of panic rising in her chest, even as she recognized that none of her rehearsed excuses or whispered lies would hold up against the forensic precision of Finn's digital watermark analysis and Bridget's painstaking audit trail. Once through customs, she slipped into the back seat of a black SUV with tinted windows, Carter's car, its interior as dark and silent as the thoughts crowding her mind. Carter Walton, the polished corporate lawyer whose reputation for loyalty was matched only by his tangled history with Zoe, sat in the driver's seat, his jaw clenched, eyes flicking to her face through the rearview mirror. He hadn't been surprised by her sudden return. He'd known Grace was under investigation, had fielded her frantic calls begging for legal counsel, and had agreed to represent both mother and daughter with a professionalism that belied the ache in his voice when he reminded Zoe that any misstep could turn her into a co-defendant. Zoe shut the door behind her, the click of metal sounding like a verdict in her ears, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, Carter cleared his throat and said, "They've secured the hospital, Zoe. Finn and Bridget are combing through every file. They've already seized the forged reports. The DA's office wants more. They want your mother's original pathology box, the one with the unaltered slides and anesthetic logs. Without it, they can't prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt." His words were clinical, but Zoe felt their burn. She alone knew where that box was hidden, locked away in a storage unit Grace had rented under an alias, a single metal container that held the last threads of her mother's defense. The SUV glided through the empty streets toward Pacific Palisades, and Zoe replayed every decision that led her here. She'd long suspected her mother was capable of deception. She'd found inconsistencies in Grace's explanations of tissue sample transfers, heard hushed conversations over the phone in the dead of night, but she'd trusted her family over her instincts, believed that love could outweigh any wrongdoing. Then came the incriminating security footage, the time-stamped lab entries, the shipping manifests for sedatives, all pointing to a carefully orchestrated scam that preyed on terminally ill patients and siphoned millions into offshore accounts. Finn's team had traced digital watermarks on the MRI scans back to Grace's secret suite. Bridget's subpoenas had revealed anesthetic logs with massive unaccounted doses. With the DA circling and pressure mounting, Grace had turned to Zoe, pleading, manipulating, promising that once everything was settled, she would explain, she would make amends. Zoe had agreed, thinking she could manage the fallout, that she could protect her mother without sacrificing herself. But now Carter's words sliced through that illusion. To save Grace, Zoe would have to hand over the very evidence that proved her mother's innocent mistakes or deliberate deceit, and Zoe found that she could not bear to see Grace's world crumble entirely. By dawn they arrived at Carter's villa, its shadowed driveway lined with hedges that rustled in the Pacific breeze. Inside, the lawyer led Zoe to his study, where a mahogany desk was strewn with case files, DA subpoenas, and transcripts of Grace's hospital emails. Carter closed the door and faced her. "We need to decide," he said, voice low. "Either you produce the pathology box and we negotiate a plea that could keep your mother out of prison, or we refuse, and the prosecution will use her own paperwork to lock her up for years. There is no middle ground." Zoe felt a tremor of terror at the clarity of his ultimatum. She swallowed, heart pounding, and whispered, "I can't let them have it. If they do, Mom is finished." Carter's expression softened, but when she turned toward a sideboard where a small, nondescript box lay hidden beneath papers, he froze. Zoe realized too late that in her desperation she'd brought the box with her, convinced she could destroy the contents once and for all rather than see them used to convict Grace. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, rows of glass slides, stamped and labeled in Grace's neat handwriting, a stack of anesthetic logs marked with patient names, a keycard that granted access to the clandestine or... Zoe's plan had been to burn the slides and shred the logs, to erase every trace of the crime, but as she reached for the matches, she felt Carter's hand catch her wrist. "Zoe, no." His voice was urgent. "Don't do this." She looked up into his eyes, saw pleading and fear mingled there, fear for her future, for their relationship, for the integrity he'd built his career on. Yet as she hesitated, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. The DA's investigators had traced Carter's digital footprint, and now they were closing in. A raid was imminent. Zoe realized that in trying to save her mother, she was damning them both. She snapped the box shut and pushed it toward him. "We have to turn it in," she said, voice breaking. Carter caught the box, relief and sorrow warring in his expression. "Thank you," he whispered. But at that moment the study door burst open, federal agents in suits pouring inside, badges gleaming under the chandelier light. Carter's jaw set as he moved to shield Zoe, but two agents advanced and placed her under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, they called it. Proof that Zoe had willfully attempted to destroy the pathology records. Grace Buckingham's final ally was now cuffed and led away, the box of slides still clenched in Carter's arms. Watching Zoe being escorted out, Carter felt his heart fracture. He had come to Los Angeles hoping to mend what had once been broken, to navigate legal strategy and personal redemption side by side. Instead, he stood alone amid the whirlwind of charges and shattered trust, holding the only key to Grace's salvation. In the back of his mind, he knew the next steps: hand the box over to the DA, press for leniency for Zoe, negotiate a deal that might spare her more than just a crushed heart. But as he watched the doors close behind the agents and Zoe's silhouette vanished into the corridor, he understood that some fissures ran too deep to bridge. The case that started with a miracle MRI had ended with an irreversible fracture. A daughter's loyalty torn between blood and justice, a mother's empire of lies laid bare, and a lawyer's hope of love dashed on the jagged rocks of betrayal. The crash of finality echoed through the courtroom hours later when the judge, reviewing the charges, ordered Zoe to be held without bail pending further hearings. Carter stood at the railing, the pathology box by his side, as Zoe's tear-streaked eyes met his one last time. In that moment, no words could reach across the chasm between them. The only sound was the gavel striking, the echo of a family's ruin, and the unrelenting certainty that some truths, once uncovered, could never be buried again. Grace Buckingham's offer to cooperate with the FBI arrived like a thunderclap in the hushed halls of the federal offices in downtown Los Angeles, her voice crackling through the secure line as she negotiated the terms of her plea. Facing up to 10 years behind bars for the multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that had preyed on cancer patients and for forging medical records, She dangled the names and locations of her international clients who had purchased her phantom surgeries and fake pathology reports, an illicit service she'd marketed to wealthy buyers desperate for organ transplants and synthetic cures. The lead investigator, Special Agent Marquez, sat at his desk surrounded by case files and fresh evidence. Shipping manifests, offshore account records, encrypted emails, and listened as Grace revealed the tip of a vast iceberg. She had been working for a shadowy syndicate that trafficked in human organs, using her credentials and covert operating rooms to harvest, package, and ship organs to the highest bidder. What had begun as a scandal centered on an LA hospital's basement suite had just exploded into a full-blown federal investigation implicating patients, surgeons, rogue brokers, and powerful figures from Istanbul to Zurich. Within hours, the case was upgraded to a federal racketeering and human trafficking probe, and the resources of the FBI's Organized Crime Division were mobilized. Under protocols for witness cooperation, Grace was repositioned into government custody, her own fate hinging on the quality of the intelligence she could provide. The first priority was protecting the key witnesses who could corroborate her testimony: Liam Spencer, the youngest scion of the Spencer fortune whose miraculous cure had been built on her fabrications, and Zoe Buckingham, Grace's daughter and reluctant accomplice, whose efforts to shield her mother from prosecution had nearly landed her in jail for obstruction of justice. Early one gray morning, agents in unmarked SUVs whisked Liam and Zoe from their temporary safe house and placed them into the U.S. Marshals Witness Security Program. Their identities would change, their lives uprooted, but their safety was paramount, at least nominally. But within the vaulted corridors of the Los Angeles field office, suspicion already simmered. A classified memo went out among a select few. One of the agents assigned to protect Liam and Zoe had reported unexplained payments to a personal account traced to a shell company in Cyprus. Agent Hollis, reputed for her ironclad loyalty, was quietly reassigned pending an internal affairs review, but whispers rippled through the ranks. Had someone on the inside been compromised? Had the very siphon of illicit funds that had lined Grace's pockets also infiltrated the bureau? As the team prepared for the first interview with Grace, to transcribe her revelation of the overseas ring, they sealed off the secure interview room, swept for bugs, and stationed a rotating guard outside the door. Meanwhile, Special Agent Marquez flew to Washington to brief headquarters on the case's explosive potential. Evidence pointed to a network run by a man known only as the Broker, a figure with tentacles stretching across 3 continents, capable of arranging illicit transplant surgeries in state-of-the-art facilities disguised as legal hospitals. Without the Broker, the ring was fractured. With his takedown, the FBI could expose a modern slave trade in human organs. Inside the sterile interview room, Grace sat stoically, shackles undone but her wrists unconcealed beneath the table, her eyes flicking warily toward the observation window. Across from her, Agent Marquez clicked on a digital recorder and began, "Dr. Buckingham, we appreciate your cooperation. Let's start with your first contact with the Broker." The interview stretched for hours as Grace recounted coded meetings in a Parisian apartment hotel, encrypted messaging apps, and a rendezvous at a private clinic in Istanbul where she had overseen the extraction of a donor kidney destined for a clandestine vessel bound for Dubai. Every revelation was cross-checked in real time against bank transfers, shipping records, and informant tips. By midnight, Marquez held the names of 5 primary buyers, billionaires seeking rapid transplants, and the coordinates of 3 labs where human tissue was processed. He left the cell to brief forensic accountants and logistics experts, the weight of the case pressing down like iron. Meanwhile, in a safe house on the outskirts of Carson, Liam and Zoe underwent the trauma of identity erasure. Their personal effects were bagged and cataloged, passports were shredded, phones wiped, and aliases assigned: Mark Reynolds for Liam, Natalie Chambers for Zoe. They sat side by side in a small living room furnished with bare essentials, a sofa, a coffee table, and a television perpetually muted. A marshal named Gibson delivered the news. "You'll remain here indefinitely until the trial. Do not leave the premises and report any unusual activity immediately." The door locked behind him with a definitive click, and the siblings exchanged a look heavy with uncertainty. Zoe's thoughts trailed back to the night she had handed over her mother's original pathology box to Carter Walton, shoulders sagging at the betrayal of her own instincts. Liam felt anger toward Grace for dragging them into this hell, but also guilt. Had he ever doubted her completely? Now, as they sat in forced quiet, they realized that their mother's salvation had become their own imprisonment. Little did they know that the compromised agent, Hollis, had already signaled the broker with covert messages embedded in routine status reports. At dawn, a black Mercedes SUV without plates coasted to a stop half a block away from the safe house, its engine idling like a restless predator. Through tinted glass, the driver consulted a list of supposed law enforcement schedules and noted a gap in the 8 a.m. convoy. The broker's emissary had furnished Hollis with enough evidence of internal rotations to predict the marshal shift changes. That afternoon, Liam looked out the curtained window to see a delivery man carrying a large bouquet of exotic orchids, masked in courtesy, but likely sprayed with a fast-acting sedative. Zoe intercepted him at the door, her heart pounding as she realized too late that the marshals assigned to verify visitor credentials were the same ones flagged in the inquiry, their IDs phony, badges counterfeit. Within moments, chaos erupted. Guards stumbled and slumped on the floor, incapacitated by the sedative. Liam lunged for Zoe's arm, dragging her toward the back exit, but the assassin waited there with a tranquilizer rifle trained on their heads. In the crossfire of adrenaline and fear, Zoe shouted, "We have to trust each other." Liam reacted on instinct, grabbing a heavy vase and swinging it at the attacker's legs, buying seconds as he shook Zoe free from the gun's aim. They sprinted down a hallway, hearts banging, until they burst out into bright daylight and bolted for a neighbor's yard. By the time local police arrived, summoned by a neighbor's frantic 911 call, the assailants had vanished. Agents Gibson and Summers, a pair not implicated in Hollis's cohort, herded Liam and Zoe into an armored car, adrenaline still coursing. Liam's knuckles were white on the door handle. "They know our routines," he gasped. Zoe nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "We can't trust the Bureau," she whispered. The car roared away as FBI sirens echoed in the distance, and back at headquarters, Marquez confronted the betrayal. Hollis was missing, her badge turned in at a known drop point, her laptop gone, a ghost inside the system. The broker had infiltrated the agency's core, and now Liam and Zoe, the government's star witnesses, were sitting targets in a deadly game. That night, Special Agent Marquez convened an emergency meeting in the conference room, the walls lined with whiteboards crisscrossed by red string linking suspects to locations. The U.S. Attorney's Office joined by teleconference, demanding security measures for the two siblings, while cybercrime specialists traced Hollis's digital footprints through the dark web marketplaces. Every hour the broker's network remained intact meant lives at risk and rivers of blood potentially harvested for illicit transplants. Marquez issued a new order: move Liam and Zoe to a black-site safe house in an undisclosed location, under the protection of a joint task force with the DA and Homeland Security, no state or local law enforcement, no single point of failure. They were to travel under cover of night in an unmarked FEMA vehicle, escorted by agents flown in from Quantico. As the convoy rolled out under the cloak of darkness, Liam and Zoe sat in the back of the cargo van, breathing in recycled air and clutching each other's hands. Outside, storm clouds gathered, thunder rumbled as though echoing the tumult of their destinies. Grace's calls from prison crackled through secure lines. plead with them not to forget family, promise redemption once the broker was unmasked. But Liam couldn't forgive yet, not while his life had hung by a thread because of her sins. Zoe pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall, repeating a mantra of survival. Behind them, the task force hunted Hollis and the broker across international borders, each revelation from Grace a potential lifeline and a deadly lure. In the coming days, as indictments rolled out against high-profile clients in London, Dubai, and Basel, and as Interpol red notices flew out for the broker's associates, the question remained. Would the FBI contain the leak within its ranks, or would the broker cut the cord and strike at the final witnesses before the trial? For Liam and Zoe, every mile driven in the dark brought them closer to a tomorrow where they might once again see daylight without fear, but only if they could outpace the betrayal that lurked within the very agency sworn to protect them. And somewhere, deep in a hidden cell block, Grace Buckingham watched the news unfold with a mixture of pride and dread, knowing that her cooperation had set in motion a chain reaction that could bring down a criminal empire, or doom her own children to become casualties in a war she had unleashed. The storm had broken, but its fiercest gusts lay still ahead.